Marlboro had spoken to me and said, listen, why don't you speak to Jean Todt? And that year I was killing Rubens, the big teams, you know, and then there was me and Mika were fighting for the next couple of positions in qualifying. Mika would generally get me in the McLaren a little bit, but it was me and him. And I wanted out of Jordan. I knew there was no way that Eddie could ever really step up to the big guys. The gap was too big. It was impossible for him. So I needed to get out. I had a $5 million buyout clause, which was my problem. I was thinking, who's going to pay $5 million just to get me out? Yeah. But I went and met Jean Todt, and I says, listen, I'm supposed to get $1 million kickback from that. I don't want the money, so it's only $4 million. So they said, listen, okay, let's do it.
Did you go there with a sense of the heritage and the destiny that every driver's...
For sure. I remember ringing my sister saying, I'm on my way to Geneva to sign for Ferrari. Her reaction actually made it sink in, you know?
But you knew the kind of role that you were going to be required to fit into, and...
Not really. Not really. Everyone says I was going there to be Schumacher's lackey, which was not the case. I signed a contract where I would follow team orders, but if I was faster than Michael, they would have said, let's go with Irvine, you know? That's always the case. The guy who's fastest gets the treatment. Michael was the fastest. He's always the fastest of all his teammates. He was killed every teammate he ever had. So, you know, I knew it was going to be tough because I'd seen the guy race. I'd followed him. I remember once in Macau, I followed him in his first year I'd ever seen him. And I came into Dick Bennett. I said, geez, I don't know who that guy is. And the guy's sensational. So I knew it was going to be a tough gig, but the way I looked at it is, you know, I'd beaten every teammate I'd ever had. So let's see how I get on with Michael. In the first race, I qualified him, you know, and then we had such a bad car that it was a disaster. It really was. I remember when it came out, I said to Michael, this thing looks worryingly different from everybody else's car. And it was just a disaster. And, you know, that year, he did an amazing job to drive that thing because it was a piece of junk. It really was.
What was the environment that he created at Ferrari? Did he have a sense of control?
Anything. He didn't, honestly, I think that's all completely made up. He was the best driver. Everybody knew he was the best driver. Jean Todt was the best manager. He put the best people around him. Like, Michael made so many really bad setup mistakes, it was incredible. Like, huge mistakes. But everybody knew he was the guy that would get the job done. If you give him the car, he'd get the job done. Even if you didn't give him the car, he'd still probably get the job done. And that's what he brought to the situation. Jean Todt brought this umbrella to keep the Italian media and Luca away from the team, to keep this little organization calm. He brought Ross Brawn in, who was no genius, but he was like, he had his process and he stuck to that religiously, you know, and he brought Rory in. He's not Adrian Newey, but good enough to get a good enough car for Michael to win the championship, you know? And they got it done, but it was not like Michael brought to the team amazing confidence in it. He's the guy to get this job done.
But from your point of view, he was the one who seemed to be doing most of the testing, most of the development.
That's why we screwed up.
Was that a frustration?
It was, because I think it was about a year later, they realized Michael wasn't that good at setting up a car, because he didn't have to set up a car. He was so damn good. You know, he was very good at engine stuff. He was very good at, you know, mapping the engine and throttle response, things like that. He was very, very good at, but actually setting up a car, he was a disaster, in my opinion, you know, and that's where they did a very good move when they brought Rubens in after, you know, I left in the end of '99. They brought Rubens in, who was a very good test driver, so it covered that weakness that Michael had. It was a myth, and you've seen it in Mercedes. He didn't make the impact at Mercedes.
But at the same time, as a driver, those first 2 years for you at Ferrari, what were you learning from him as a driver?
Just how quick he was. That's it.
You learned nothing in terms of technique or smoothness or...
No, he just had an innate ability to drive a racing car very, very fast. The '96 car was a disaster and was nearly undrivable, and only someone of Michael Schumacher's ability, and maybe Senna, could have driven it. Yeah. '97, the car got better, so I moved closer. '98, the car got better, and I got closer. '99, the car got better, and I got within 2/10 of him in qualifying. And then, you know, because they started understanding pitch sensitivity, because the '96 car was insanely pitch sensitive. You couldn't, Michael could drive a car every millimeter. I wouldn't drive it every meter, you know? And as the cars became less pit sensitive and more predictable, you didn't need to drive at every millimeter, and he lost his big advantage. You know, if it was, you know, a wheelbar race with a Formula 1 engine in the back, Michael Schumacher would win it by a mile. You know, that's kind of the ability he had. So it was, the cars were getting easier to drive. The engineers, I think, were understanding yaw sensitivity and pitch sensitivity and steering sensitivity, and they were starting to understand what the drivers could live with,
Yes.
what normal drivers could live with, and Michael wasn't a normal driver.